Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So I just want to say thank you for tuning in today. My name is Matt Thomas, and you're listening to the USGS Landslide Hazards Program Seminar Series. This seminar is co-organized with contributions from Stephen Slaughter and Jamie Kostelnik. And for those of you that are new to this meeting, you have the ability to submit questions via the chat window or to use the raise your hand feature in combination with your microphone and video camera. We typically wait until the end of the presentation to take questions. So in the meantime, please just do your best to make sure your microphone is muted when you aren't intending to speak. Today we're joined by Jennifer Bauer. She is the principal geologist and co-owner of the Appalachian Landslide Consultants in Asheville, North Carolina. She started there in December of 2011 after working with the North Carolina Geological Survey's Landslide Hazards Mapping Group. And prior to working for the state, she worked at MacTech Engineering and Consulting in Raleigh, North Carolina, after getting her geology degree from UNC Chapel Hill in 2001. She's also past president of the Association of Environmental and Engineering Geologists, which is an international professional organization dedicated to applied geology. She has over 20 years of engineering geology experience and is passionate about applying that experience to help protect lives, property, and infrastructure. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today and serving as our kind of ultimate or last talk for 2021. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for everyone attending today and tuning in for the last talk of the year. I appreciate being asked to be a part of this. When I've watched several of these presentations, and many of you are researchers and really do an excellent job of spending a lot of time learning more about the details of certain aspects of landslides or rockfall or all the variety of things that we've learned about over the last year or more. And today I wanted to tell you that your work is appreciated and it's also applied to help make other people's lives better. So today I'll talk to you about applying the landslide science and our role in connecting the research that is done with the public. So I'm going to start with a story about Mr. and Mrs. McKenzie. This is their home in Crusoe, North Carolina. This is a photo of it prior to Tropical Storm Fred, which occurred in August of 2021 of this year. Ms. McKenzie, she worked in Asheville, and her husband stayed home with her elderly father, who unfortunately was ill. And of the night of August, or the afternoon of August 17th, Ms. McKenzie had been continually checking in with her husband and father to make sure things were okay, because that's when Tropical Storm Fred was coming across. And it was right around 3 o'clock where she couldn't get through, or she couldn't get in touch with her husband. And she thought that something was wrong. And actually her father, who never used the phone, called her. And at that point she knew something was wrong. But so she left work and she tried to get in to see to her house, but because of the flooding and washed out bridges, she wasn't able to get there. And the next day she was able to get in, and she saw this. It was actually worse than this. This is after they've cleaned it out of the road, but this is the debris flow that had occurred. It started upslope of the home and traveled over 2,000 feet down the slope, and it didn't damage her home, but had wrapped around it. And the saddest part of this story is that her husband must have heard a noise or something and stepped outside and been hit by this debris flow coming down. That's the only thing that she can figure, because his body was found a couple of days later down the river. And she's given us permission to tell this story because she wants people to understand landslides as a hazard, as part of living in the mountains, and to also understand the importance of being of awareness of around these types of hazards that we do have. So this is one of the reasons that I do what I do, and because I want people to have that awareness. And this is the view of the landslide. Looking up the track is kind of in the center portion of the landslide, and the McKenzie home is here in green on the upper middle left part of it. And you can see how much debris has been washed down, and that shed that was on that first property completely gone. And all of the other things that they had there on that property completely missing. So this is one story of how we as consultants can often act as the bridge between the research that's done and applying it to affect people's lives. And so I wanted to start with just a definition of applied geology. And one definition is that applied geology is the use of geology to solve or aid in solving human problems in which geological factors play a part. And I found this little graphic online, which I thought did an interesting job of illustrating how the basic sciences are kind of up here, physics, chemistry up here in the atmosphere, and then pure geology makes up the leaves of the tree. But applied geology is where you take all of those atmospheric and tree leaf type things, and you actually connect all of those to the community. And that's where I really feel that that we play a role as consultants, is to make that connection to the community. So today I want to talk to you just how we as consultants are offering a combination of the research and innovation that we do in-house, combined with application of the research and innovation that is done elsewhere as well as in-house, to really improve the lives of people in our community. And by community, I mean those all over the world. So today I'll talk to you about several different projects and different styles of projects that we've worked on, where we've taken research that's done and applied it to impact people's lives. And I'll start with this first project, landslide inventory and susceptibility mapping. So I've been a part of landslide mapping since 2005, when the first landslide hazard mapping program started at the North Carolina Geological Survey. And myself and my business partner, as well as a couple of our team members, our employees, were a part of that first 7-member team. And we mapped Buncombe County, Henderson County, Macon, and Watauga counties during that first stint of the mapping program, which went from 2005 to 2011. And then in 2011, that program lost its funding. The state legislature ended the funding for it. And that's when my business partner, Stephen Femmeler, and I started Appalachian Landslide Consultants, because we knew that people still needed this information. Unfortunately, we were able to create partnerships with some nonprofits in Haywood County, and also worked with the county government in Jackson County to complete mapping in Jackson County. So the areas that are in green here are the ones that ALC did outside of being part of the Geological Survey. And then in 2019, or I guess it was 2018, the NCGS had the landslide mapping refunded by the legislature, and have now contracted out a portion of that. And we've been helping the NCGS with mapping in Polk and Rutherford County. So the landslide inventory really does connect research that is done by lots of researchers, as well as some in-house innovation. And some of the things that we were able to do was to help develop an inventory geodatabase and refine that as we went from developing that at the state to working on it as a consulting firm, and really adding some fields that we felt like would help folks that were using the database that were not geologists get a better sense of how to understand it, as well as prioritize areas that might need to be repaired. We also came up with developing some criteria for delineating features from the LiDAR, which was much different when we had 6-meter resolution LiDAR, and now we have much higher resolution LiDAR, so you can see things even better, but it also requires developing additional criteria. And we've been able to use some other categorization of landslides that has to do with age classification, age and activity classifications, to help try and get a better sense of the age of some of these things that we can now see really well in the good LiDAR. As I mentioned, we use classification systems defined by others for standardization across the spectrum of landslide mappers, so that we can speak the same language, so to speak. And as part of that continuing research project, or research component, we continued to collect data at the initiation zones of landslides so that if we decide to do some statistical analysis about where these are occurring or the types of soil or the depths of the soil at initiation zones, if we can collect that information, we have it available, which is one of the benefits of actually going out and visiting all of these locations that we identify remotely. And we use a system where we take rugged field computers that are equipped with ArcGIS on them so that we can collect the data right there in the geodatabase as we're out there in the field, which doesn't necessarily seem like something that's so innovative now, but we started, at least at the Geological Survey, we started mapping landslides on air photos that we laminated and put Mylar over. So we've come a long way from those Mylar map days. So this is a map, or two maps, of the counties that we were able to get funding for to map as ALC outside of the state funding. And the map on the left is of Haywood County. And you can see part of the information that we collect separates out the landslides that are occurring on natural slopes or slopes that have not been modified by construction. Those are the ones in green, which you see kind of in the upper reaches of the county, on the west end, the south end. But what really stands out to me in Haywood County are the number of slopes, the number of landslides that happen on slopes that have been modified by construction. And this is one area where we can take information that we learn about them and use it to communicate the importance of constructing properly, because these that have occurred on constructed slopes are ones that we can prevent. In Jackson County, you'll see there's more of an even mix, or almost even mix, of landslides occurring on natural slopes versus constructed slopes. You can kind of see there's a cluster of green dots in the center portion of Jackson County here. Many of those are ones that occurred during the 1940s heavy rain events that came through, passing over these mountains, and most of those are debris flows that have occurred on natural slopes. So we've gotten to see a number of landslides. Just myself, I've seen over 1,000 of them with my own eyes. So we get a really good sense of where these things are starting, what it looks like, what the conditions are in the vicinity of those, which is helpful when you're trying to communicate this type of information to non-scientists. It's also helpful when we're coming up with ideas for models. And when we were deciding on what model we wanted to use for landslide susceptibility, we tested out a few different models, and we looked at the one that the state had used, and we wanted to see if we could take the information that we had in this massive database and use it to create a model that was really capturing where these landslides were starting. So we tried to test out some of the more infinite slope-based models, and sometimes, that's part of research, is testing it out in the real world and see if it's really matching what you're seeing out there or not. And we really were having a hard time fitting in the real world parameters that we were seeing, like the soil strength parameters or the soil type, that kind of thing. We were having a hard time getting it to fit with what we were really seeing out there. So we decided to come up with an empirical model based on where landslides were occurring, specifically shallow translational debris flows, particularly, that were occurring on natural slopes. That's what we were trying to model. And we decided to look at it from a geomorphological perspective and take where we knew these debris flows were happening and extract out the geomorphic data that we could from those locations, and then create a model based on that to show areas that were similar geomorphically. And we came up with a model that we feel pretty good about. We called it at least the purple areas, the areas where natural debris flows might start, we called it where natural debris flows might start, because we knew that people in the public had a hard time understanding models that were shown in the past. So we wanted to make it really clear, like, this is where these things might start. And our model captured 83% of the natural debris flows in the database that we had at the time. And this was in 2013, 2014, 2015 time area. So that's the first part of the model, but we also wanted to show where natural debris flows might go. So we created the second part of the model that shows where natural debris flows might go if they were to start in these purple areas where they might start. So the pathways are a flow path type model that shows where they would go, and we clipped those based on some information that we had about where we thought landslide deposits were ending, as well as some other information that helped us decide where we wanted to end those. We also came up with what we called the slope construction caution areas. And these are areas that we feel people need to pay attention when they are doing construction, because we did see that abundance of slope failures that were occurring on constructed slopes. We felt like we needed to let people know, if you're going to build on slopes that meet these characteristics, you need to be really careful, because they're already close to unstable. And if you are going to modify them, you really need to make sure that it's done with engineering in mind, not just cutting a slope and dumping something over the edge and building your house on it. We just seen too many of those to feel like we couldn't address this issue as well. And 89% of the landslides that started on modified slopes were captured within this model area. So we not only created this inventory and these susceptibility maps, but we are using these models and these maps to help people make informed decisions, whether they're buying a house or deciding where they want to put their house on a piece of land. We use these maps over and over during our individual property evaluations, or any really property evaluation we're doing in the mountains, because they're available. We've also used these maps in some of our outreach to help educate those emergency responders and emergency management about the areas that were perhaps more likely to be issues during the next big storm. We've given talks to real estate and building community organizations, trying to educate them about how to use the maps, or if you see a property or one of your clients is interested in a property that is covered by either an inventory feature or a susceptibility model feature, to contact someone who has experience looking at landslides in Western North Carolina to get a site-specific evaluation. Because that's really what the models show. They don't show that something will happen or won't happen. They show, here's where you need to have the site actually looked at, which is where the applied geology really comes in. So here's an example of us using the mapping. This is a development in Haywood County who first contacted us because they were interested in learning more about some parcels that an outside developer was considering buying. And this outside developer was from the flatlands and may not be aware that landslides are an issue in North Carolina. So they wanted to be able to show some maps that indicated what was going on within their development. So we were able to put together this map of their development with all of these tan areas indicating where we have landslide deposits, the pink outlines showing where landslides have traveled, and the red triangles showing where those landslides initiated, primarily debris flows. And most of these occurred during 2013 when we had several inches of rain in January of that year. And then we've also, when we were doing this mapping, we mapped areas that were subsiding a little bit or dropping down, mostly on fill slopes. And those areas we've indicated with little red dots. And we mapped those to help people know these might be the next debris flow. Let's take care of these and clean them up. And many of these locations were cleaned up after that 2013 slide event. We also provided this client or homeowners association client with the susceptibility model to show that these tracts that the developer is interested in do have landslide susceptibility areas, and that if they are going to construct on these, then they need to be careful when they are doing it, and perhaps have a field-based evaluation when deciding on home sites and whatnot. We also do use these maps when we are doing individual property evaluations. One of our clients was interested in looking at a home on this parcel down toward the lower portion of this map that's highlighted in turquoise. And they wanted to know about the stability of the property itself, which we went out and evaluated, as well as, and what we add to this evaluation is if this home could be impacted by something that started upslope. And this home is within that neighborhood I just showed you. So we knew that there were lots of landslides that have occurred within this development. So we thought, well, let's let them know that there is the potential of that occurring, and actually use the maps to help identify where upslope we should look for any signs of movement, at least on the publicly accessible areas. The client here decided against buying the home, but not because of any debris flow potential, mostly because the little auxiliary structure needed a lot of work that they didn't want to put time into. We recognize that the mapping is not perfect and the communication is certainly not perfect, and there's always room for continued improvement, which is part of the research process. One example of that is exactly this debris flow that occurred in Crusoe in August of 2021. This photo is of the upper portion of the debris flow. It was taken by Jesse Hill with the NC Geological Survey. They got their drone out there and were able to take some good photos of the track and looking up the hill. And this is a photo looking down. You can see there's quite a bit of woody debris, and actually this landslide, this debris flow occurred right on the edge of an old mapped deposit area as well. So it was an example of a debris flow that occurred within old deposits, which is something that we've seen. But one thing that we feel could be improved is our modeling of the runout zones. You'll see here that here's the McKinsey home, and here is another home that was hit by this debris flow and actually pushed off of its foundation and destroyed completely. Here's another view of that and how this debris flow widens out quite a bit at the base here. This is the drone photo that Jesse took. This is the before photo, and this is the after. You can see the soil track coming down, and it actually does spill out a little bit on top of this fan, this old deposit debris fan here, and continues to come down. So in this is the picture of the house that was hit. The debris flow comes up from behind here and hit this greenhouse on the picture on the left, and the picture on the right is looking at the backside of the house from the debris flow. And here's the debris flow track overlaying or overlying the ALC susceptibility model. And the model does a great job of picking up where the debris flow started, and even this little side scarp that we found. And it does a good job of picking up the middle portion of where the debris flow would travel, but we still have room for improvement when it comes to where the debris flow is spreading out at the bottom. And that's still a challenge for us when we're thinking of creating models that are at the county or watershed scale. It's really difficult to do that type modeling, and I think there's room for more research in that and to be applied to these types of projects for sure. Another room for improvement is that the maps that we had done for this area, we had communications with emergency management, and we had had communications with emergency responders, but there's still the need for connecting local information, local rainfall information, with some type of debris flow warning system. And I know that this is something that the USGS is considering including in their work with the opportunity of the National Landslide Preparedness Act. But this is really one example where that would really have been life-saving, because we had rain gauge information from the Crusoe Fire Department that was located actually just on the north side of this map here, so right at the toe of this slope. And fortunately for us, we've had communications with the National Weather Service, and Pat Moore put this information together. He's based out of the Greenville-Spartanburg National Weather Service location. He took this Crusoe Fire Department data and broke it out into hourly increments, and then even into 5-minute increments. And he was able to determine that they had over 2.5 inches of rain in the 2 o'clock hour. And we think that this happened somewhere around 3 o'clock, but this data proves that it probably happened sometime around the 3:05 to 3:10, when they got almost a 1/2 inch of rain in 5 minutes, which is really impressive for the eastern part of the country, or at least western North Carolina. And that they got 4 straight minutes of 0.12 inches of rain per minute. And then the peak of that was 0.16 inches of rain. So heavy rains that and the technology exists, but it's just figuring out how to connect this rainfall information with the landslide susceptibility information with where people live, and use some type of reverse 911 system or something that I know that we are smart enough to figure out. It's just putting it in motion, because it really does. It can be a lifesaver. And as well as continued conversations with people to help them better understand what to do before heavy rain events, like know where you live with respect to the landslide maps, and understand if you're in a place that could be potentially unstable. And then what to do during the heavy rain events, like if you're in a safe place, don't go out and get on the roads. If you hear loud noises, don't look to investigate them. If you have to run from a debris flow, know which direction to go before doing so. So there's a lot more opportunity for communicating this type of thing too. And that's where continuing to apply the research and the information we know comes into play. So switching gears, the next project I'll talk about is the unstable slope management project that we had the opportunity to work on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And we did this in partnership with Schnabel Engineering and WSP, who had a contract from Eastern Federal Lands to do an unstable slope management or asset management understanding of a portion of the Blue Ridge Parkway. And it is part of their geotechnical asset management goals, as well as trying to get an understanding of where are the most hazardous locations on the parkway, so that they can use the limited funds that they do have for mitigation to help protect people. For those who aren't aware, the Blue Ridge Parkway is it's one of the most visited national parks in the country, because it's an autoway. People just come and drive this road, and they're amazing views. And it was an amazing project to work on. But the USMP is a lot of applied research, and the purpose of it, or the way that it works, is that a numerical value is assigned to each slope based on multiple different types of characteristics that are collected in this slope rating form. And this is just the first page of the slope rating form. But the USMP takes into account not only rock slopes, but also landslide features and the fill slopes that might be associated with those. So it can be rock or soil, which is a little bit unique compared to simply a rockfall hazard rating system. This one also takes into account the maintenance history, the geometry of the slope, and impacts outside of the right-of-way, as well as impacts to cultural, things that have cultural importance or environmental factors. And it really, it takes risk into account so that those who are making decisions about which slope to fix do that based on their, on good information. So these are the areas that we were able to map, or we covered doing this USMP rating, and we rated 455 slopes over 4 separate designated sections. For reference, Asheville is in the middle of Buncombe County here, so we were able to work from the southern end up several miles, over 100 miles of the parkway to collect those data points. And part of that data collection was using a lot of the work that had already been done. The North Carolina Geological Survey had done a slope data collection all along the North Carolina portion of the parkway. And so we were able to use those points and the history that those points, the information collected or contained in those points, to really help inform the history of certain slopes, and which goes into the hazard rating. We were able to also use the landslide inventory geodatabase from the NCGS, as well as the mapping that ALC had done in Haywood and Jackson County, because the parkway goes right along the border of those 2 counties. And we used the NCGS geologic mapping that was done specifically along the Blue Ridge Parkway, as well as rainfall data, because that goes into the rating system as well. This is a map of the 2017 high resolution LiDAR that I pulled in for this section of the parkway. You can see these squares, orange squares. Those are locations of landslides that were in the NCGS landslide inventory. And while we didn't have the good LiDAR at the time when we were mapping those, you can see in the LiDAR, those are actually those landslide scarps that are associated with those points. So we did a pretty decent job of locating those just based off of aerial photos, georectifying those. So we use this information in these USMP points. The USMP is a culmination of a lot of research that was done by brilliant landslide folks that figured out how to combine all of the different characteristics to come up with a rating system. And they put lots of time and energy into using the correct formulas and all of that. And I want to say thank you to all of you that are out there. I know that Landslide Technologies was really involved in that, and the National Park Service and Federal Highways. So thanks for all of the work that you've done. And we've been able to apply that now to hopefully help the parkway identify areas that they want to try and mitigate in advance. And we also were able to use this information to collect data on landslides that happened in, it says 2019, it's really 2021. It happened this year during that same tropical storm Fred. When it passed over toward the Haywood County area, it passed right over this ridge. And this was one of the debris flows that occurred. And of the 4 debris flows that we found along the parkway stretch here, all of them occurred within old initiation zones. So by understanding where these old initiation zones are, we can perhaps help get an understanding of where these debris flows might occur again, because there's still soil up there. So another project I want to talk a little bit about, where we have applied research to help protect people, is this is a commercial property that we worked on. This is one that has to do with a a property that was used as collateral for another piece of property. And that property, this one, it was worth about $1.1 million. It was used as collateral for an $800,000 loan on another piece of property. And the other property was foreclosed on. So then the bank came into possession of the property that we're talking about now. And we'll call it Piney Mountain. So the bank owns this property. And in 2013, that same heavy rain events that we were getting that year, it started to cause some additional slope movement that hadn't been noticed before. And eventually this one had to be repaired, but I'll show you in pictures the story. So this is the development that was right downslope of the property that was acquired by the bank. And the property acquired by the bank is in the western section of this red triangle. And this is located near Asheville, North Carolina. So the woman who owned this home, after some heavy rains in May of 2013, noticed that there was some mud dripping over a retaining wall and kind of splashing up on her house. And she was like, hey, what's going on? So she was able to get a hold of the bank who owned the property upslope, and the bank contracted a prime consultant to come and figure out what was going on. There was really dense vegetation along this slope. And so first they had to do some removal of that and get to where they could see the soil to see what was moving. So they just started kind of at the toe of the slope, and they're noticing that the bulges were still happening, or that things were still cracking, and then trees further and further up the slope kept falling on a daily basis, and they'd have to relocate the silt fences to try and catch all of the sediment. So they needed a better understanding of what was going on. And the consulting firm that they hired was not engineering or geology based. So they brought on ALC as well as a geotechnical engineer, Gentry Geotech, here in the Asheville area. So we came out and did our evaluation and ended up finding out that this landslide, the scarps of it were located very close to the ridgetop, almost 600 feet up above the toe of the slope that was back behind the woman's house. And it was just scarp after scarp, and some of them were 6 feet high, and things were definitely continuing to move as the time went on. So in conjunction with the geotech engineer, we logged some soil and rock in 6 different borings, and they collected some triaxial data and got the lab tests run, showing that the soil had a friction angle, effective friction angle of 39 degrees, cohesion, 400 PSF, and they knew that the test results were elevated due to partially weathered rock inclusions in that. But there was something still off with that. Friction angle 39, that seemed pretty high for this landslide. While we were out there, we had looked at some rock structure in the cut that was in this area. And one of the things that we noticed was that in the lower portion of the slope, where the excavator operator was working, he said, well, I see that there's this plane where when I stick my bucket in, a whole slab of soil just comes right off. And we were like, we got to see this. So we went down there, and you could see the slide plane. It was beautiful. It was just nice clay covered, and it was actually along the compositional layering of this rock here, which was pretty micaceous. It was a schist, and schist and schistose metagraywacke, but that slide surface, that compositional layering, was dipping about 16 degrees, way different than the friction angle of the soil that we were finding in some of these borings. So fortunately, we were part of the team conference call, or everybody got, at that point, we were all in person actually, and we all got together and were able to communicate our concern about this slide plane and how that's really what needed to be stabilized when they were discussing mitigation techniques. So they took that into account. And what they ended up doing was a soldier pile lagging wall here, kind of at the base of the slope. They rebuilt the little stone retaining wall behind the woman's house. And then further up, they did a soil nail wall and lots of drainage. So for a property that was used as collateral for $800,000, the bank ended up spending over $5 million to repair this. And it was really fortunate for this neighborhood that the bank owned that property, because had it been an individual property owner, they probably would not have gone to the extent that the bank did to make sure that it was fixed. So sometimes things do work out. However, the bank was not very happy about that. So my next example is one on a private individual's property. And this is one where, research, the technologies are always changing. And so sometimes you have to refine your hypotheses. And this is an example of that. So in 2018, we got a call from a contractor who said, I have a client who's building a home and we're starting to see some cracks up above the house and we aren't really sure what's going on. So we'd like you to come out and take a look at it. And at the time, this is the photo on the left, or the map on the left, is what the 6-meter LiDAR resolution looked like that we had at the time. It was flown in 2005, and that's about what we had. The contractor did give us a drone photo he had taken and had created some contour lines based off of that data from the photo. And so we could see, some landslide features kind of on up the slope, but we really weren't sure what this slope looked like prior to construction. So we went out and did our evaluation of the property and got a better sense of what we were calling Area 1 slide, directly behind the foundation that had already been dug out and constructed, or the walls had been placed for this house. And then slide Area 2 that was perhaps a little bit less active, just to the west of slide Area 1. And we went up the slope and identified some possible old scarps that were way on up the slope. So we were using the information that we had to make the best decision that we could about this home and its location. And we talked with the contractor and the owner and decided that they needed to move the house, that it was really, they were at a point where it was still cost efficient to move the house rather than try and stabilize this entire slope. But the caveat was that they wanted to move it within a certain radius so that the crane didn't have to shift locations. When they picked this foundation up and shifted it, they didn't want to have to try and walk it or anything like that. So we're kind of limited on our recommendations on where it could go. So you'll see there's a possible alternate house location shown in this map on the right. And keep in mind, the photo on the left, or the map on the left, is the LiDAR we had at the time. We were called back to the house earlier this year, and they said, well, we've moved the house, but now we're seeing cracks behind it too. But this time we had the benefit of using the more recent, higher resolution LiDAR, and we could see this greater outline of some slope movement that was much bigger, or potentially has been much bigger in the past, and could use that to be a little bit better informed about what was going on. So now we think that this yellow outline is where this old landslide perhaps has been, and unfortunately goes right through the home. The new cracks are offset a little bit from the house. And one of the things we had told them was that if you move the house, you can't cut the slope. Well, that didn't work for them. So they did, unfortunately, cut the slope. And we feel like the new cracks are more related to the new excavation than to being within an old slide area. But this is one where they're going to try and manage it with drainage modifications and just try and keep the slope as dry as possible, because they recognize they can't move the house. Again, it's already been built, and they can't shore up this entire slope. So they're just going to do the best that they can. So an opportunity to, or an example of perhaps an area where having additional research done or having additional technology can really help to make things more understand, or to help understand them better. So the last item I wanted to mention was the outreach that we feel is really important. And as a company, we do a lot of outreach to, like I mentioned, real estate groups, the public. We talk to Rotary clubs. We really talk to anybody who will listen. I've spoken to several universities, just trying to help educate folks about this applied geology, about how to keep themselves safe by understanding the land that they're living on or potentially living on. I really do feel like outreach is the root of this system that's shown in this figure. It's the connection to the non-geology community. I mean, you can stick a tree down into the soil, but it's really the roots where that connection with the community starts. And the communication is really that outreach and that connection. So as an example, I finished one of the talks I gave at a university geology program. I told them that they, as geologists, have an advantage because they have the opportunity to understand the earth and the geomorphology better than most people do. And perhaps this applies to you as well. But I encouraged them to use their knowledge to make smart decisions about where they were deciding to live, and to also use that to help others understand the potential hazards about where they might be living. And with that, I will turn it back over to Matt, and I'm open to any questions.